how they should be removed, very important issues, the law reform. And also issues like the electoral corruption, but fake news, something very new nowadays. So also these are new dimensions of corruption. Thank you very much, Vipulji. Now, fourth speaker, please, if you can be mindful of the time, because now we only have about half an hour, and looks like we'll not have much time for our interaction and comments, which we must actually, if you can also cut into the lunchtime, the organizers, this might be. So thank you very much. And our fourth speaker now, if I might invite Mr. Mohsin Raza Khan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll just take 5 minutes because I'm cognizant of the fact that people will want to ask them questions.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'll refer back to mostly what they have said quickly, because I've just come from Rajasthan. I was observing the elections there, and a lot of conversation was about Rajasthan and about elections, so I'll just come back to that. So my first point is that I think civil society has a significant role. We have seen it that, for example, Narega corruption is much less in Devdumudi, where MKSS is based, the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan. I've been to the villages there, I've seen that, but it's very high in Barmer. In Barmer, there are no effective civil society organizations. It's a failure, actually, largely in Narega and Barmer. So high is the level of corruption. Similarly, we have seen in Andhra Pradesh, the citizen audits, they worked well for a while. So, I'm stating the obvious here. But I want to come to a particular election that I've just observed. It's in a tehsil, which is a semi-urban area in Rajasthan. It had an industrial problem. There was a lot of pollution going on. And there was a 4-time sitting BJP MLA there, who people believe was in cahoots with the industrialists there. This was spoiling the groundwater, spoiling the farms there. An activist, political activist and NGO activist led a movement for 15 years, got the NGT to enter the case, and then got the industry shut. The industry was opened a year later on rotation basis at about 25% capacity, and a plant was supposed to be set up for cleaning this pollutant. Now the plant was supposed to be in a PPP partnership, but it doesn't work, and everybody is involved, from the politicians to the industry owners to everybody, and some people claim even the activists are involved. We don't know what's going on. And having observed the elections, I know that that it's possible that this candidate will again win for the 5th time, because as we were just discussing, whether it is, there is some societal problem. We have to admit it. It's not just politics is broken. Our society is broken. As in everywhere else in India, the elections are basically caste-based. There is an exchange of votes in return for favors. There is appointment to the parishads, appointment to the corporations, panchayats. Tickets are given, money is exchanged by the industrialist, and votes are obtained. I don't think the rate is as high as Mr. Jayaprakash has pointed out in Telangana, because for Telangana you're saying 3,000 to 4,000 crore for 119 assembly seats. That works out about 25 to 35 crores per seat. In Rajasthan, I would say it's between, nobody has accurate figures, but 2 to 4 crores is the figure that's quoted for a campaign.
We're learning the ropes.
Yeah.
Telangana, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu lead. The rest of the country follows.
Yeah, you're probably right. So, but I want to just point out, focus attention on 2 points. The first is that we need to start. It's very difficult because the police is involved, everybody's involved. So I think the most important actually intervention is transparency. And just like the United States had a real revolution in the 1960s, I would say, with the Sunshine Laws, which came in, where you could even call up and check the phone records of your governor, of your chief minister of the state. You could call up you can actually call for all his official emails to be delivered to you. We have actually weakened our right to information laws, and this, I think, is the basic problem, because people are very aware, but they need the information. There are common citizens who are always willing to stand up in every area. The second point I'm saying is that we have to also be aware as activists of what the political and economic consequences of the activists' action is. Because because of all this 2G and coal, which I don't think are as significant, because when the auction was done, the figures were a fraction of what was claimed. The much bigger scandal, the biggest scandal that India has right now, actually, in my opinion, is land. And whether you see Gujarat, whether you see Greater Noida, wherever you see, nobody has really no chief minister, forget chief minister, no large politician is going to jail for this scam. And yet the public perception is, on the ground in Rajasthan, that the Congress is corrupt and that Modi and BJP are honest. And so your actions have political consequences on the ground, massive political consequences, I would say, actually, and massive economic consequences. Because as the NGT shut down those factories, thousands, maybe 50,000 laborers were laid off, and they have nowhere to go. Where are they going? So the whole town is in a deep recession. The town is Pali, you must be aware of it. Many of you, it's in close to Jodhpur, 70 kilometers. And this has deep economic consequences of poor workers, because the treatment plant is not working properly, because there's corruption going on in the treatment plant as well. So the effluents are still coming out. So the actions of the NGOs also have to be held accountable. I'm not in favor of the NGOs being left free just because they are good citizens, The consequences have to be thought out. The second order, third order consequences have to be thought out of the actions, whether it's policy paralysis or corruption, whatever it is. So I will just cut my talk now and open for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, reiterating the point that when power and money come together, how lethal they can become. And of course, another issue about political and particularly the economic consequences of people, the ordinary citizens again, the consequence of the interventions made by actors with good motivation. And I think we need to be mindful of these consequences. Definitely a very valid point. Thank you very much, Professor. And if I might now invite our fifth speaker, Ms. Sajari, another journalist and a faculty member of OPJ University. Thank you.
I just heard Mr. Nayak talk about mainstream television media, and he's absolutely right. It's in an indefensible position. So I think I'd like to begin with just a quick reminder of what the media should be doing and where it stands in combating corruption. And honestly, the role of the media is, and it's been discussed significantly, is fairly straightforward. We want the media, among other things, to investigate corrupt officials and institutions. And in Indian history, I think one of the problems that we've had is the relationship between media, state, and systems. When you look at the line that is drawn in 1947 between the pamphlets and the freedoms movement statements pre-independence and sort of the Nehruvian philosophy of the media working alongside the state post-independence, what you have is an institution that right from its genesis in independent India is formulated to assist the state rather than critique it, which may have come from fundamentally good motives, but has long-standing consequences which need to be discussed. Secondly, the media plays a significant role in prompting investigation by official bodies. Our role is not just to investigate, because honestly, once we do that, that's where our job stops. It is to follow through and talk about what official bodies need to do to take it up. Here we've got the issue of, and particularly in television media, and to an extent in digital media, I think print was significantly better about it, is when it is just the length of the news cycle. The 24-hour news cycle, that's focus, 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 and once it's over, we don't talk about it anymore. So when it comes to the idea of prompting and following up on investigation by official bodies, even from the best intentioned news media spaces, I think there has been a signal failure. Reinforcing the role of the state's anti-corruption body, I think the CWG scam was actually quite an interesting example of how that worked relatively well, because we looked at what the report said. We did ground investigations, we followed it up, there was a certain degree of accountability. We made the people and the citizenry of the country aware of what was a fairly technical report. Gave them a real perspective on what that was about. But also, obviously, on the flip side of that, questioning the state's anti-corruption bodies and their investigations. It's not enough to just reinforce it. You also have to ask the question about who is being investigated, why they're being investigated, whether those investigations are legitimate, whether the state is doing what it needs to be doing and investigating those who need to be investigated, or whether it's carrying out either political motivations or vendettas. Helping shape public opinion, for better or for worse, and creating pressure, working, of course, with civil society organizations as well as citizenry in creating pressure for anti-corruption legislation. Ensuring accountability by the state, again, going back to my point about news cycles and the failure there of continued accountability. Incentivizing political leadership to be proactive against corruption. I think that's an important point, which is that not wait for corruption to take place, but create a media atmosphere whereby there is a certain apprehension within political leadership, within those more given to corruption within power, that there will be a call to arms if they are corrupt. They will be found out, they will be held responsible. The corruption will be revealed, and so incentivizing them to act against it before it happens rather than after. Act as a bridge between organized civil society and state. We're very tired, as we should be, I think, of televised discussions today, particularly given the genre that some of them have taken up recently. But traditionally, the fact that television gave a platform for the state and civil society organizations to sit across a table and have a public mediated discourse being witnessed live by the public, I think was a significant role that the media played. And finally, maintain a public record. Again, Mr. Naik just talked about how he has been looking at English media news reports, and of course that's very, very limited, but given the fact that information sources are being cut off in other spaces, I think one of the most important roles that the media has right now is to maintain public record. So what prevents the media from, in India, obviously, from successfully combating corruption? First of all, ownership patterns. And quite frankly, there is no easy answer to this. We cannot have state-owned media. It has historically not worked. And big corporate houses owning with media ownerships has not been successful either. News media is a very, very expensive operation. You can have small localized news media institutions which have been incredibly ethical and doing great work, but obviously the scope that they have is equally limited. A large media organization needs money, and that money comes in India 90% of the time from large corporate entities, political corporate entities, or any combination thereof. What we can do to change ownership patterns is still an ongoing discussion and a debate, but I can say from personal experience that corporate ownership means editorial control, means stories do not get told. Lack of protection for journalists. Journalists have died. Whistleblowers have died, journalists have died. You run the risk of death when you are reporting on certain issues. If you are from a high-profile Delhi or Bombay-based organization, you'll probably get a threat or two, but you probably won't get killed. If you are a small local journalist for a local newspaper doing hands-on day-to-day work, the threat to your life is massive, and there is, much like the lack of a proper Whistleblowers Act, there is really no protection for them. Access to information. The Right to Information Act, which came out about 3 years before I started working as a journalist, was transformative. My colleagues and seniors talked about what it was like before and what it was like now, and all of us were working with, I remember working with Mr. Kejriwal in his early days. We were working with RTI activists, experts, trying to see we didn't know what the best way was to frame questions. And this is why I just did a little sort of sad cheer when Mr. Mudgal was talking about it. For the last 3 years, I have been trying to get information on demonetization through right to information, and I have been told at every juncture, at every point, with every question, that it is a matter of national security. I don't know why it's a matter of national security. There is no reason why it should be a matter of national security. Similarly, I have been trying for the last year and a half to get RTI information on the minutes of the GST Council meetings, which has also been refused to us on the grounds of national security. So access to information is being systemically curtailed, and that is preventing those of us who would like to. I'm not alone. There are hundreds of journalists who have been trying to get this information, and all of us have been unsuccessful. And finally, lack of broadcasting standards and accountability. It's not just fake news through WhatsApp. It's not fake news through Facebook. It's not fake news through social media. We currently have national news channels who are broadcasting lies, not spin, straight falsehoods, and are not being held accountable because we don't have a body which is empowered to hold them accountable. We have industry standards which have been completely and entirely defanged. Now, what are the imperatives of a free press? The UN Charter of 1987 spells out just a few of them here. Censorship, of course, is unacceptable. There must be no government discrimination, and legal and tariff practices that limit the media must be abolished. All of these are relatively straightforward, and India has been relatively good about not having any of these straight up. But coercive practices, on the other hand, are much more complex. So the challenges to a free press include, and are not limited to, constrictive or inefficient judicial processes. I am not going to go into them. I am not a lawyer. There are lawyers here who are much more qualified to talk about that. But as a journalist, the running joke at this point is, if you don't have a defamation case against you, you haven't been doing your job right. Economic pressures, directly or indirectly created through government influence or other influences. The fact that we know for a fact that advertisers have been told not to advertise with certain groups. It's not official, but it's fairly easy. The government will say, we will make your life easier. They will make your life easier, and that's it. Once you cut off advertising revenues, there is no other way to make money. There is no other way to keep going. And a culture of placatory self-censorship. We will give you access to certain interviews. We will give you access to certain events. We will give you access to certain people. We will give you access to certain papers. All of that if you please us. And the process of placatory self-censorship takes place. Now, there has been a lot of talk, and I think I cannot talk about the media without talking about the internet today. Digital media as well as social media is the tool of the future. So where does it stand today, and what are the pros and cons? And there are pros. We're so busy talking about the cons that we do forget the pros. It is more difficult to censor. It is more difficult to directly or coercively control. It allows for a rise of alternate voices, very often marginalized voices, which even traditionally have not been represented in mainstream media. And it allows users, viewers, readers, people who are participating in online media to gain access to more diverse sources of information. However, what it also leads to is parallel, unmediated, and unverified discussions, which is really what we call fake news. It creates echo chambers that leads to questioning mainstream media and mainstream media objectivity. And unfortunately, and I think this is the most dangerous component, it becomes an agenda setter. So if there is something major going on, you can use the internet to change or reset the agenda into something more trivial, but something much more dramatic that captures public attention. So you basically use it as a distraction. So what's the way forward? How do we strengthen the media? Well, it sounds very obvious when I put it down like that. You ensure independent editorial voices. You have strong antitrust laws. You empower independent tribunals for media accountability. You improve investigative journalism training. You make facts matter once again. You create reliable media networks which engage with the public, and you push harder for civic participation and responsibility. But all of this sounds easy. It sounds glib. Or it's incredibly complicated. Creating Indian media for the longest time has been talking at its public, not with its public. That's something I think that certain political establishments have clued in on and have used that to their advantage. Indian media needs to retrain itself to engage with the public. Indian media needs to, and I think again, let me go back to the point that was being made earlier, which is that there needs to be a coordination, as Mr. Venkatesh Nayak said, between various actors, and the media needs to be a part of that coordination process as well. That is how we can push harder for civic participation and responsibility. And finally, as Ms. has been saying, there has to be transparency. Who is paying? Where is the money coming from? Who is the owner of which media house? How much editorial control does which voice have? At this point, I can think of at least 4 media houses where we don't know the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kent. Another important institution, the media. When I was in the Anti-Corruption Commission, I worked very closely with the media and used the media. If you're not able to do something, media can be actually a very fantastic accomplice, and where results can be also achieved. That's something. But there are problems, I think, not only in Bhutan, but as we are highlighting, the institutional problems, the inherent problems, the cost and the transparency, but it has huge potential to make a difference. And then, of course, the dynamics that the social media is creating, the internet is creating, again, another important topic here for discussion. I think we need 3 days. Thank you very much, Ms. Sen. And then now we are to the last the last speaker, and then the floor will be open for discussion. The last speaker is Professor Kumar Paramjit Singh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My presentation preparation it was for 20 minutes, and now we have like 15 minutes left with us. So I'll just had like few discussions on corruption, and basically my view on corruption is like the way we are like reacting to it, the way we are very much emotional to the concept of corruption. The word corruption or the practice of corruption, it is not a new practice. It is always there, and evidence suggests like it was there since last more than 5,000 years in the world. And all the religion in past, it has developed, and it has in one way or in another way, it has tried to combat these practices of the societies, and this is how it has evolved. So in current time also we are facing the same scenario, we are facing the same situation. So very briefly, I would give some fact of Transparency International ranking. India ranks 81 out of 180 countries. India, which is like at the most promising countries in the world, and if the figure is this, then I just wonder like where we are and what actually we are doing with ourselves in a term of like corruption practices. The World Bank estimate, it says like $1 trillion it is spent in corruption, in corrupt practices, which is a huge, like our economy, it is of 2.53 trillion or something, and it is the 6th largest economy in the world. So, and again, like I concur with other participant that this is just a tip of iceberg, because like corruption, it is imbibed in our society so much. I cannot think of anything like in past I have been involved in giving bribery to get my things done. It ranges from, say for example, paying like 50 rupees to the traffic police, or likewise, like all of us, if we say like, let us be honest, we were part of corruption. We were part of corruption since always, and now like we have to, like, since the problem has aggravated to this extent, we are thinking of how to curb it. But the best time of curbing corruption is not when we face corruption of that extent. The best time of curbing corruption is when the corruption is lowest, because that is like, it is symptoms. Corruption is symptoms of unethical practice. So what would be the ethical? It is a constant question, and fight against corruption, this is a constant fight which we have to, which as a society we need to fight from time to time and all the time. So this is this like in 5,000 years ago, also Rig Veda, they talk about like how like corrupt people, they will face a problem through their children's, and Samaved, it talks about like evil corruption, like how it enters in your body. Yajurveda, it talks about like how the kings should conduct themselves. So the list goes on. In Buddhism, there are eightfold path, how to like right understanding, right intent, right speech, right livelihood. So this is not a new problem, but we should be aware as in society, as in civil society, as in lawyer, as in media, we should be very much aware and fight and combat the corruption practices. Like, it's a constant thing. It's not something what like we see the symptoms and then we have to fight. We need to fight it from. I remember, like, I was watching a video on Kautilya's. There was in the court of Magad Emperor. There was the discussion going on in amongst the scholars, and it was asked from one of the scholar, like the sovereign fund, from whom sovereign fund needs protection, and one of the scholar, he said that sovereign fund, it needs protection from the king, from the king's relative, and also from the thief. So the thief, they are like, this is like very obvious understanding, money needs protection, property needs protection from the thief, but we never talk about like the money, the sovereign fund, the public fund, it also needs protection from the someone who is like, who has command, who is having absolute ownership, kind of like how we define these days. So I remember, like, this is this line by Lord Acton, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I remember in my school days I had read this, and this line has ever remained in my like mind, in my brain. And when I was when I thought to participate in the conference, this was the first line which came into my mind. So it's about the power, it's about like who holds the responsibility and to what extent they are doing justice to their responsibilities and to their post. Now, I have cited like few applicable laws which is applicable in India, which mostly touch public undertaking and public government agency, not like private domain. So I'll not take much time. I'll just like flip through the slides. Prevention of Corruption Act 1988, which is primarily applicable on government agency, public servants, and so on. Indian Penal Code, not directly but indirectly, section 207 and 409, it talks about the public corruption by the public officers. And then we have Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002, which talks about combat of against money laundering, which prevents money laundering, confiscation of the property, and to implement UN resolution and declaration through this enactment. Benami Transaction and Prohibition Act 1988, which again, so you cannot buy property in the name, false name, or in the name of like person who has not paid for that property. Right of Information Act, already we had like much discussion on this. Foreign Contribution and Regulation Act, it basically regulates the acceptance and utilization of foreign fund and foreign hospitality. Income Tax Act, not again directly but indirectly, tends to corrupt the corrupt practices. So cash credit, unexplained statement, unexplained money, amount of investment not fully disclosed in the books of account, unexplained expenditure through these sections. If you cannot give like satisfactory answer to the assessing officer can proceed forward, and they could declare that these incomes, these investments, these are income of the assessee, and accordingly go forward and charge income tax on that. And of course, like penalty is also applicable on these kind of investments. Companies Act, we have like Companies Act is about like evolution from time to time. So through Companies Act also we have like provision of accounts and audits, Constitution of National Financial Reporting Authority, which is not effective as of now, but we are hoping that it would be effective very soon. Concept of internal auditing, which is applicable on certain kind of companies who has like particular turnover or profit or paid up share capital. Establishment of investigation by Serious Fraud Investigation Office, and other sections which talks about furnishing false information, destruction of documents, etc. Competition Act, again, not directly but indirectly, it talks about corrupt practices between the business houses in relation to anti-competitive agreement, abuse of dominant position, and certain kind of merger and amalgamation, which would lead to which would harm to the consumer at the end of the day. Whistleblower Protection Act, already we had discussion on this, again, but it is applicable to like public against public servants. and not against private. Now, this is last thing. This is something like different corporate anti-bribery code. This is developed by Institute of Company Secretaries of India. This is not a mandatory provision, but it is voluntary as of now. So companies, they could adopt it through board of directors resolution, and once they adopt it, it would become applicable. But my experience, it says like, I'm also like company secretary by profession. So companies, Institute of Company Secretary, they work on the direction of government to a certain extent. So secretarial standard also, this was like very voluntary, but it is mandatory for secretarial standard as of now. So I hope that this would become a mandatory provision in coming times. Corporate anti-bribery code. So they have defined, like they have come up with 9 clauses which would be applicable to the companies once they adopt it voluntarily in nature. If it is mandatory, again, like we see, there is a very positive chance. So I will just like read out the clauses. First clause is adherence to existing anti-corruption law. Second is bribery in private sector. This here I want to like have a small discussion. Most of the laws what we have discussed, it is not applicable to the private sectors. And private sectors, they are like biggest contributors in like actually these acts of corruption. So still like we are not very in a position where we could deal with like bribe giver and bribe giver, because bribe taking is like an offense mentioned like strictly, but bribe giving, this is something like still we need a good discussion on. Facilitation payment, bribery to foreign public officials, policy in relation to hospitality and expenses. So this code also like have a model code on gift, hospitality and expenses. They have a model code on whistleblowers mechanism. They have a model code on other aspect of bribe giving and bribe taking. And yes. And in conclusion, this is a very big problem. We should acknowledge it. It's because corrupt people involved in corrupt practices, they are innovative. From time to time, they are like they will come up with certain ideas, but the law is not apt to face those challenges. So this is a constant fight. This is a constant combat against those practices rather than just event-based thing like anti-corruption movement. I really appreciate the people from civil societies who constantly fight to amend these laws, to propose the thing and constantly fight against this social evil. Being alert, taking the right approach, defining zero tolerance, not being very ambiguous. Very clearly they should say like, but again, I don't agree to this point in totality, because you need to be innovative to find the innovation in corrupt practices. And performing due diligence, conducting a tailor-made training program, awareness program to the organization, to the companies who has to deal with such thing, and employing a dynamic approach, because the concept is very dynamic and evolving. I hope I completed my slides in 5 minutes. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak at this forum.
Thank you. Yesterday we also discussing that you can have laws and laws and laws, but they're as effective as their enforcement. But thank you very much for enlightening us. So now I open the floor for discussion. If you can eat into the lunchtime, 15 minutes or so. Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you to all the panelists for this amazing speeches. I'm an associate professor of law, and I wasn't aware of most of these things, but now I am, and I can take this knowledge into the classroom with me, because I think most of the people in law students are just not aware of the extent of the. I was shocked myself. I'm really grateful for enlightening me. I have a brief comment to make, and I have a question for Mr. Mudgal. My brief comment is that when we drafted the Constitution, about 80% of it, we took it from the Government of India Act, 1935. We took it up from there directly. But that was a legislation that was created by people to rule. Government in a democratic republican system is supposed to serve the people, not rule over the people. Therefore, this attitude shift has not changed. I can attest to that from my own experience at the bar. I practiced law for about 6 years, and the government simply doesn't think for the most part that they are there to serve the people. That's the first attitudinal change. Mr. Mudgil, I have a question for you. You mentioned the need to have important constitutional office holders and important office holders to be appointed by high-powered committees. Though in principle I agree with your proposal, I wonder what you think about the use of a committee in appointment of judges, with specific mention to the fact that in Article 124, the President was supposed to consult with only the judges. The cabinet is not mentioned in Article 124 anywhere, and I submit to you that the government was never supposed to have any role in appointing judges at all. Now, what do you think about the role of using commissions to appoint? And of course, it will require you to comment on the Supreme Court's invalidation of the NGAC.
We'll take a couple of, just in the interest of time, a couple of questions, and then I think whether it's directly directed to a panel or generally, and I think other colleagues in the room can also respond. So few more questions, two more, and then okay, our MC.
Thank you very much. I have this question for the panelists in general. I think that ignorance of rights, we are actually focusing on what all should be done to bring for institutionalizing, as Mr. J.P. Prakash said, that it should be considered as an institutional issue. But then these measures are not going to the common man. The rights of the common man, he himself is not aware of. So that ignorance of rights contributes to corruption. Shouldn't it become a part of our day-to-day life education? Shouldn't our educational system imbibe and teach what all the citizen has as their rights or not? That's my question.
One more, and then panelists will respond. One more, otherwise. Oh, sir.
I have a comment. I have two comments actually. Not really a question, but I'll put my comments to it. I'm an ex-executive of the Tata Group, and I worked in the e-auction company of the Tata Group that actually sells the spectrum today. My job, I was the resident head in Delhi a few years ago, and my mandate was to go and get this business. This is a joint venture of Tata Steel and Steel Authority of India. And we uprooted Rothschild. But I don't know if you're all aware that Rothschild started with the auctions. When Spectrum was ordered to be auctioned, Rothschild was the company managing it. And we uprooted them and started doing the auctions. Now when we run auctions, there are two ways to run e-auctions. I'm just making it as a, perhaps just to enrich the discussion. Because e-auctions, everybody thinks from the outside that they're very transparent. They can be conducted in transparency, or they can be conducted in a very corrupt way as well. So there are two ways in which they are conducted. This company, how it offers e-auctions is as a service. So they have a glass room in which they have 30 or 40 young people, auctioneers wearing headphones, biometric entry, nobody can enter the room. And the purpose is that if there are many auctions going on each desk, people are online, people are making those bids, there are 30 minutes or 1 hour or 2 hours. News shouldn't travel out. Many times they keep the identity of the bidder secret. So you can see on the screen, if you are a bidder in the auction, you can see 6 people are bidding, but you don't know which one is which. You might know that I am here because you know your bid, and the others are number 1, number 2, number 3, and you get a chance in the auction to match the others' bids. Now, while the auction is being conducted, if news leaks out of who is what and what exactly is happening, somebody who's an auctioneer can coach the bidder on what to do and how to bid. It's a very quick 30-minute process. You don't even have paper records of it. You can have an e-record or a CD or something like this. So auction can be conducted like that with complete secrecy, which is what this company offers. And Spectrum auctions are today running in this way. So it's a managed service provided by this house, joint venture PPP of Steel Authority and Tata Steel, and they're conducted in secrecy in Calcutta. Online, people don't know where the auctioneers are sitting, so nobody really gets past the information, but the integrity can be maintained this way. But there is another way to run the e-auctions. The other way is the way the government is running e-auctions. They can provide the software to every government department, which the government has set up something called e-marketplace. They have also set up e-gov. Now they provide the software. Any government department can run the auction on their own desk. Now when there is no secrecy around it, when there is no glass room and the communication is not banned, then information is bound to travel out. So when you are conducting an auction from an open office, you can pass information to the bidders and the secrecy of the identities can be removed. So I think some of the auctions today would be running like that. So don't think that e-auctions are a panacea for taking corruption out. They are not. I have a second comment on the poll box, and I've also been involved in trying to win to be the auctioneer for poll blocks for the same company. Now, since it was a Tata Group company, we were not allowed to bid. But I was in the poll ministry in the years that this proposal was mooted by me, and we tried very hard to become the auctioneers, but since it was a Tata Group company, some connection was made and we were not able to become the auctioneers. Now, when auctions of poll blocks, when poll block scandals came out, I don't know if all of you are aware, many of you have done fantastic work in bringing out these scams and fighting for the cause. But do you know that the Coal Mine Nationalization Act of 1973 forbids private mining, forbade from 1973 onwards, private mining of coal. So coal mines were not being allotted, coal blocks were allotted, and blocks being different from mines, the term of block was created, where the private company will acquire land, and the coal underneath the ground was given free. Now, in all our litigation, I see that this has not been challenged. What has been challenged is the way the private bidders came in. They fudged their records and pretended that they had a big company, they had massive revenues, they could set up power generation plants. So sometimes we miss the main point. We miss the point, perhaps, of how the government committees actually allowed private mining of coal without amending the Nationalization Act.
I have one question that allowed.
Okay, you are.
So my name is Tarun. I'm from the first year LLB Pro DDLL program. My question is directed towards Mr. Mohsin Razak Khan. Sir, you mentioned about how there should be transparency in the chief ministers and governors in the USA. You mentioned about some sunshine laws pertaining to USA. So, but sir, if that's actually allotted if it's followed in India, don't you think that would be a threat to the national security? I mean, what exactly do you mean by revealing whatever the governors and the chief ministers talk through their emails or whatever communication channels? What exactly do you mean by that?
Okay, so thank you very much. So first,
Sure.
you respond.
Thank you. Very good questions. And very brief answers. My judge's appointment, I think there should be a proper, bigger, broader mechanism. NJSC debate is so beautiful debate. I mean, I think all the judgments are worth reading. And each one of them adds to the kind of understanding about the whole issue. I personally believe that there should be ultimately some UPSC kind of commission. UPSC has done a good job in India of, our IPS, IAS officers. They've selected good people. I'm sure there can be a system like that for the entire judiciary in the country. But more important than that for me is some kind of a Judicial Standards and Accountability Act. That has to come. We have been filing RTI applications in the court and we've been told that courts don't have to give RTI replies. I mean, we've gone to the highest authority. Mr. Acharyulu is sitting here. We went to the Chief Information Commissioner and we said, sir, how can you deny information about yourself? But the Supreme Court actually denied, and the Chief Information Commissioner, ruled in favor of the Supreme Court, saying that yes, you can actually. And it was very innocuous information. It was not rocking the boat information. It was a very simple information. When you reserve a judgment, what are the rules? How long can you keep it reserved? Is there a timetable? Was there any reason for reserving the judgment? And you give.
It's a rocking boat information.
You're questioning the discretion of their majesties.
You'll throw everybody overboard because there are no.
So I went personally, in fact, for the hearing, and I said, sir, this is, and there were 3 or 4 very good lawyers representing the Supreme Court of India. And I said, you don't need lawyers. I mean, it's commonsensical. So finally, I think the chief, Judicial Standards and Accountability Commission plus some UPSC kind of body is the best answer.
Krishna here described it as a crime, not giving a judgment after reserving it.
Yeah, so I mean, I think
But it
a
is
lot
not
of.
definition is so very difficult.
Only one more thing I want to say about the coal matter, and I think the most competent person to answer is sitting here in our country, I would say. Sir, in the coal auctions, I think what was going on was it should be written about. I think somebody should write a book on it. You know, company's name is, let's take a name, Mukesh Power Company, and it has a one-room office in Ghaziabad. And because these are captive coal blocks to be given to power companies, steel company, or cement companies, in the hope that whatever they manufacture will be given cheaper to the consumer, and hence, you know, the loot of public property given to them. Now, some companies enrolled themselves as power company, steel company, etc., and they took allocations, and they were openly given to the cronies. So for us, we have no doubt that in this country there is huge capability. The auctions, e-auctions, all kinds of things we are capable of doing. We just wanted to break the circle of business as usual. We said that business as usual cannot continue. You find out what is the best way. We are not even suggesting. We said, the auction to the highest bidder, but even that is not the best thing. Say for community radio, the value you get out of giving that particular kind of portion of spectrum for free is much more. Say in Uttarakhand, if there had been 100 community radio stations given out free to NGOs and ordinary people there, then probably the impact of this flood would have been 100 times less, because people would have been much better prepared. We have the example of Japan, where you have this kind of disaster communities which work through community radio. So I mean, spectrum, I don't think that giving it to the highest bidder is the best answer either. But what you're suggesting is that, e-auctions, I'm sure, even court doesn't know. So court can give it to the kind of most competent person or a committee of those persons to do this. I think that was the spirit of both spectrum and the coal case, that look, we don't know. All we are saying that the business as usual is dangerous. First come, first served basis. 4 o'clock you're supposed to give your application. You don't even know whether you have to give a draft of 400 crores. I don't think any company, even Mr. Ratan Tata, can't produce a 400 crore ka draft in half an hour, because there are ways and companies to be navigated before you sign a check. So I think it was basically that, and I think all the public interest litigation should also be kept to that only. You can't say that school mein peene ka pani nahi hai, PIL leke chale jao. No, you see the constitutionality where the liberty is being denied, or where the fundamental rights are being kind of violated. Then you go. Otherwise.
Thank you very much. So, who will maybe if I can invite our man to respond to this?
And Chairperson, I'll respond to some of the comments as well as what other participants said. Paranjit is talking about 5,000-year-old corruption, and it's intrinsically human nature, and what can we do? You're much too young. Don't be despondent. And I completely disagree with that hypothesis. The purpose of a government is, this is what Gladstone said, to make it easy for people to do good and difficult to do evil. If we accept that human beings are frail and corrupt, and it's a given, nothing can be done, then why are we discussing this? Your whole approach on morality, etc., etc. I have no question, I have no opposition to morality, but in India we talk too much of morality. Rest of the world talks about institutions. 2, the whole conference is about, or at least this session is about citizens' participation in fighting corruption. There's an extraordinarily powerful tool we haven't touched upon. It's called False Claims Act in the United States. Abraham Lincoln brought it in the wake of Civil War. In 1986, the current chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, he was instrumental in bringing about significant reforms. In the past 20, how many years now? 14 plus 18, 32 years. more than 9,000 litigations, they call qui-tam litigations. Any citizen, if she has evidence, as a group, as an organization, individual, of false claim, corruption, procurement cost is higher than normal, or the quality is substandard, or there is a public cost. Even if the cost of procurement is economically okay, there is a hidden cost of loss to the public, environmental pollution, so on and so forth. I don't want to go into details. Suffices to say 9,000 plus cases were decided in the past 32 years. 56 billion US dollars was the penalty imposed. And the civil society players, individuals and organizations are actually incentivized to professionally approach them because they get between 15 and 35% of the penalty as an incentive. So in other words, the whistleblower is made a very powerful person, institutionally. I think we should look at it. I know it will not happen in a hurry, but let's fight for that. That's the true kind of whistleblower thing we require, because notwithstanding our pious wishes, there's no society which can protect every single person who thinks she's a whistleblower. The laws protecting whistleblowers are only meant to do two things. One, your secrecy is preserved, that your identity is, if you choose to keep it anonymous. Two, if you're a public servant, your promotional prospects and your future prospects will not be affected. These are the only two things the state can do. There's no physical protection to anybody. Not possible. Judiciary. You're a lawman. Again, an absurd proposition. I can say it very nicely in 1 hour. I can say it very sharply in one sentence. Nobody is Swayambhu. Nobody can claim the right to appoint himself or herself or successors. Like it or not, there's a democracy. Everybody draws power from the people of this country. There's only one body in the country, or a series of bodies of the same organ of state. The legislature, elected, that's what we have chosen. We could change it tomorrow. But they are elected. And therefore, every organ of state has to be, in some form or other, accountable to that body or its creations, namely the government, and trace its legitimacy through that mechanism. No, you can say what you like. Show me another country on earth where people even debate this, that the government should not be involved in appointment of judges. It's an absurd proposition. Three of the most eminent jurists of the past half century of this country, Justice M. N. Venkatachalaya, he was the Chief Justice of India when the judges' case judgment was written by Justice J.S. Verma. Justice J.S. Verma himself, who wrote those judges' judgments and then realized that how bad it was, the collegial system, and Justice Krishna Iyer. Unquestionably, these three were among the greatest of the jurists. At my instance, they were the three who came together and then came up with a model, which is what has been translated into NJAC, the 99th Amendment to the Constitution, the 10-year process. The Supreme Court's judgment was self-serving and unconstitutional. I have no doubt about it whatsoever. India will realize in time. It will take another 10, 20 years because we think that politicians are all rascals, judges can do no wrong. Both are very dangerous propositions in a democracy. We have to set right politics. We have to make judiciary accountable, just as anybody else. There are no two opinions on that. That because we now succumb to a certain prejudice does not make it right. There is a constitutionalism involved. There is an institutional integrity involved. There is an issue of democratic accountability involved. You cannot do on an ad hoc basis. Even a Supreme Court Chief Justice says, if he says something wrong, they're wrong, period. The Supreme Court says there is something wrong, they're wrong, period. For the time being, out of convenience, we'll say there's no better substitute, therefore we'll go along with this, but it doesn't make it right. Coal. Two things went wrong. That is a technical issue. Whether the law is amended or not, it's a matter of 1 minute to amend the law. That's not an issue at all. Particularly in this country where Supreme Court is allowed to make the law of the land. Nobody else is. So therefore, it's not a big issue to me. But there are two things that have gone wrong. That's why earlier also I said, coal, I'm not too certain that what happened was the right thing. One, not allowing professional mining companies with experience in mining and limiting it only to captive companies was a wrong thing. Public policy wise, not legally or morally. Public policy wise, it was a bad decision. We are not getting the best out of it. Two, not recognizing the fuel linkage of the power plants already in the pipeline was a terrible decision, and much of the banking crisis today in the country, much of the power sector crisis today in the country can be traced to this. That's why I have thought long, the very people whom I brought to the table from Gopalaswamy to Lingdo to my old friend of Transparency International, Admiral Tahliani, to Mumbai's police officer, Ribeiro. I brought all these people to the table to fight that case. We thought long and hard, should we fight on the coal mines? We felt that the implications, the second and third order consequences, are so grave that we must not. If on balance, the coal auction, while it was morally the right thing, economically it was actually pretty damaging to the country, the way it's done. Not the concept of auction, the way it's done. That's why I'm very happy that you raised the issue, Mohsin, of second, third order consequences. Electoral bonds, you're absolutely right, Vipul, but we must understand the background. Arun Jaitley told me several times, he said, Dr. Jayaprakash, you fought so long and hard for that law. And we brought in that law. What happened was, Mr. L.K. Advani, he gave a directive to his party after this law was enacted, saying that we shall not collect any money other than by check. No collection by cash. Because to be fair to them, they tried. The collections plummeted by 90% within 2 months. Well, they were in power. They were not even in a position. Because in India, the culture of contributing in cash and black money, partly because of the larger culture, partly because of the fear of retribution. We still have not come to a stage where a business feels that they can be independent of the government's patronage. There is fear of retribution. And also fear that other parties may say, you gave him so much, give me that also, some money also. For these reasons, the monies fell. Arun Jaitley's response as a finance minister was a terrible response to a real problem. The remedy is worse than the disease. I just wanted you to understand the context. It's a little more complicated. So he thought like a clever lawyer. I know you're all budding lawyers. Like clever lawyer, he found a technical solution to address one problem that he felt he had as a party leader. He forgot the larger national interest and the integrity of election process. But we have to look a little deeper instead of being too judgmental. Just to make a broader point before I conclude, corruption is a terrible thing. Talked about 81st, we are terrible. Actually, we are not terrible. If you notice, consistently, and please do the study from your General Global Institute, on every single parameter of outcomes in India, India's outcomes are much worse than our corruption perception index. If you take the 49 large economies in the world, about $200 billion GDP, on every single indicator of outcome, India ranks in the bottom 5. But corruption, we rank somewhere in 30s. If you take the 100 biggest countries in the world, on every single matter of outcome, India ranks between 83 and 90. Corruption, we are somewhere in 60s. So please understand there's a much bigger problem. Corruption is a symptom, a terrible symptom. But there's a much deeper problem of governance. And that brings me to the last point, awareness. The greatest measure of awareness is not teaching and preaching. You can do all that. Your education, your homes, all this, you please do. Go ahead. Do more. Do better. No quarrel. But the greatest way to provide awakening, to improve awakening, is making people responsible. Giving them the power to commit mistakes and learn from the mistakes. I'll give a simple example. I live in an apartment in Hyderabad. Supposing I go back to this morning, woke up at 2:30, took a flight at, went to the airport at 3:30, no. By the time I go back, I'm now past 60, I'm an old man, tired, exhausted. Suppose my elevator doesn't function. I will not keep quiet. I'm paying every month 3,000, 4,000 rupees maintenance fee. Why does the elevator not function? I'll holler, pick up the phone and say, Amitabh bhai, kya ho raha hai? If he doesn't fix it, I'll ask somebody else, Ashok bhai, to take care of it. If he doesn't, I'll say, bhai, I'll give myself time, though I really can't afford, but this is important enough. Because I see a direct stake as a family, as an individual. That's how democracy truly works. This romantic notion of a democracy, I don't know anything about the meaning of vote. I don't know what's happening to my life. I nevertheless vote for somebody because they gave money, or because you offered all kinds of freebies. In Telangana, we are masters of that. Now everything under the sun is now a freebie, including a 50,000 rupees annual rent until you build your house, for which I give another 6 lakh rupees. That's offered in this election. I mean, all kinds of freebies, and of course, the emotional purchase of caste, region, religion, sometimes even language. Because in a fractious country, if nothing else works, at least the identity does work. This is bogus. This is not democracy. We only have two things: vote and right to shout and protest. They do not constitute democracy. Democracy works when I am enabled to understand what are my stakes. Ask a friend from Brazil. Ask people from China. Ask people from practically any country on earth. We have the most centralized government with the least amount of empowerment of citizens. Citizens can never learn that way. Awakening cannot grow. If a baby cannot walk, the parents simply do not carry the baby forever. The baby will be sure to be paralyzed forever. You allow the baby to walk, fall. Take precautions to ensure that there is no fatality or serious injury. But encourage. The baby falls, cries. Again, you go and tell the baby, nothing wrong, just go ahead. Within 3 months, the baby starts walking. We failed to do that. That's the single biggest failure of our democracy. Don't be patronizing. Don't think that we here know better than the people there. At the end of the day, their lives are made better by themselves. We are at best facilitators. The government at best does the collective things it's supposed to be doing. Not give lectures, moral lectures to people, not boss over people. Give them freedom. They are autonomous. The people of India are autonomous. They are the sovereigns. We are their servants. We have a job to do. Do it well, but don't take away their power and mess up the country. That's exactly what we have done in this country.
I think that's a wonderful point to close the session today. So thank you very much. Shall we give a big applause to our panelists? And our assistant professor mentioned that he is not aware of all the good work being done and good people sitting around here. So there's also a very big message that we need to really raise the awareness and the actors, especially in strengthening democracy, giving power, so sovereign power, strengthening the sovereign power we draw from our people. It's a very important message from Dr. Narayan. And I understand that the law schools of Global League has commissioned a corruption report, and scholars from BRIC countries, Turkey and UK, these countries, still going on. So if this dialogue can be continued, and with such rich experience from our panelists, if we can draw the experiences, the aspiration, the inspiration, and truly focusing on the real issues and not being too moralistic, and we can be there somewhere. And even like the sense of citizenship, at the end of the day, when you talk about CSOs, it's not just about formal structures of institutions, but about citizens as individuals, as Indian citizens, as Brazilian, as Bhutanese. What do you think? What do you draw from that, being a citizen? And what responsibilities do I have? What rights do I have? And the government created space for that. So if the ongoing dialogue that's happening in the law schools that form a Global League, if you can actually draw on such wonderful work being done by individuals and institutions like the CSO, there's so many CSOs, especially in India, I do not know, over 100,000, 200,000, good work being done. And of course, let's also not forget that sometimes CSOs, NGOs, foundation, trust can also be a vehicle for corrupt means. So thank you very much for this wonderful session. Thank you very much, sir, to the panel. Thank you.